Hello and welcome to this, another episode of Frame and Reference. I'm your host, Kenny McMillan, and today we've got an absolute treat for you. Today I am speaking with Claudia Raschke. She is the DP of multiple films, but most recently Julia, the Julia Child documentary, Fauci, the Dr. Fauci documentary, and also RBG, the Ruth Bader Ginsburg documentary. She's done more than that, but those three just bang, 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 all very timely as well. The latter two for obvious reasons. The Julia one is just more soul-soothing in a way, I mentioned in the interview that, food content kind of makes people happy, and in uncertain times, people watch a lot more food content. Anyway, Claudia is just so insanely knowledgeable. Her body of work is undeniable. And in this conversation, I think we had a borderline illegal amount of fun. So I really hope that you'll enjoy listening to it as much as I had. Enjoy listening to it as much as I had having it? Is that a good sentence? I don't know. Point is, this is a great one. You're going to learn a lot. You're going to hopefully have some laughs with us, and I'm just going to let you get straight to it. So here it is, my conversation with Claudia Raschke. Yeah, I love how at the beginning of everyone using Zoom, it was just like, record all you want. And then I get an email about a class action lawsuit, and suddenly you have to agree to be recorded. I was like, do I want that $20 bill? The way that I like to start all these podcasts, although I'm trying to think of a good way to change it up for the new year, because variety, spice life and everything. But I did look up. You said you started as a dancer.
True. You looked up what I did before, huh?
Yeah. I'm really interested to know kind of how that started, where you kind of went from there, and how that maybe shaped your creative brain. My girlfriend's a dancer.
Oh, okay. What does she do? Does she do what
jazz
type?
Primarily, but
jazz.
Like
post
a little bit of
jazz. What direction of jazz?
I'm going to assume it's modern jazz.
Well, that's cool, because I was very much into modern dance. So what happened was, when I grew up, I studied all the art forms: sculpting, painting, dancing, music. It was just something I was drawn to, but also because my family was very invested in the arts, but only to a certain degree. Dance was really not permitted until I turned 18. And that is really rough if you want to become a dancer, because your career is over by the age of 35, right?
Yeah.
So, and it was not permitted because, my great-great-grandfather had some sort of affair with a vaudeville dancer. And so that was just you don't touch that topic. But anyway, be that as it may, I love dancing. I was very much inspired by Gene Kelly, and then decided that I wanted to study dance. And it was either Amsterdam or it was New York. And so I came to New York and then studied with Martha Graham, Eric Hawkins, Mary Anthony, all the greats. But when you want to become a dancer and you even find a troupe to join, or you are invited, you don't get any money. It's just really a breadless career until you reach a certain level. And if you're lucky, you get $5 per performance and a handshake, So during my time, this is 40 years ago. So
basketball teams to dance for.
And, interesting, because of all my training in dance, it is so in my life still, because when I do handheld work, I constantly check my body position, and I make sure that my entire frame is aligned. Because when you're doing 12-hour verite and you have the weight on your shoulder, and frankly, now the cameras are not as loaded and heavy as they used to be, but nevertheless, gravity pulls on it. And over a period of time, it's an endurance. And so, I check all the time about how I align myself and how to relax my shoulder and my frame so that I can, perform ultimately my best. And with that, when you're trained as a dancer, it really influenced me by thinking about choreography. How do I move with the other characters in the space? What are my obstacles? Like, let's say there's a table or a couch or, a horse or whatever it is. How do I move around maybe something unpredictable? And that kind of really fed into also my training when I did feature films, which I did for 10 years before I went into documentaries, because it's all about blocking. And the art of blocking is the art of choreography, where you come up with a way to ultimately have the cinematography be the subconscious of the story, so that your visual strength or the visual storytelling is really maximized by moving through space. Because as we all know, when you're watching a film, when you're watching your television screen or your computer, it's 2D. There's nothing 3D about it. So it's the art of choreographing the space so that you feel you're walking through it, past edges, past objects, so that you get that sense. And so, my dance training and that choreography that I learned certainly influences me greatly these days. Still, sure. After all these years.
Yeah. Can you give someone like me who has horrific posture a few tips on how to check in with your body? Because I know when I hurt, but I don't know when I'm correct.
So it's really interesting, because I also teach master classes at the New York Film Academy. And
I went there.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, did a summer course.
Okay, specifically for cinema verite, because when you're talking about cinema verite, it is really, you have to so spontaneously draw from your different elements. May it be lighting or the technical aspect of, the optics and the exposure, the art of exposure, the art of when to rack focus, and all of that in tune with staying connected with your characters and the story that you want to present, right? Because you are like the portal to what is happening. I'm basically the first viewer of all of the excitement. And so creating that portal is fascinating. But to come back to your question, when I work for a long period of time, let's say after a half a day of shooting handheld, what happens is that your core muscles start to relax. And what happens is that your backside, your butt, swings back. And so very often that is a stress relief. But you can also equate it with the posture of Donald Duck or Daisy Duck, right? It's like that, putting your rear end backwards. And that
standing like a baby.
And that is the key thing of making sure that you push your hips forward so that you align, your entire frame. And then the other thing is that besides aligning your frame, you need to realize if you're swaying over to the right or the left, depending on how you're balancing the camera load, and check it, check if you are weighing left or right, and if your, pelvis is pushed back. So once you align that, then you're already 80% there. And then the last tip I would say is check your shoulders, because sometimes when you hold the camera, so often you try to be very still and smooth and no wiggles. And so you're cramping to counterweigh the inert motion that we have as humans. We always wiggle, we always move. That's part of breathing, right? Just breathe. Your heartbeat is going to be seen if you're on a telephoto lens. Your breathing is going to be seen if you are anything, further than a 50 millimeter. And so when you're cramping that way and do the shallow breathing, that just mentally checking in with that and saying, oh, let me relax my neck. Let me just check my frame, make sure I'm centered. Let me hold it. Let me relax my neck. And then sometimes when I do that, I actually am my own chiropractor, because while I'm having the camera, because it puts a certain weight on it, just 2 days ago, it went crackle, snap, pop, my neck just fell back into alignment.
Well, that's good.
I know, right? I was happy about that.
I just recently went to the chiropractor for the first time in my life, and did actually completely fix some problems I had from years ago. But it wasn't from working. It was because, the past 2 years have been what they were. I just fell out of shape, and then I tried to do some sit-ups and just completely threw out my hips. Oh, just like a regular workout, just completely threw me off. And I was like, all right, it's been 2 weeks. I can't walk. I should go fix this. So now I'm very aware of, trying to, or not, I shouldn't say aware, but I'm trying to get a lot better with posture and whatnot. Going back to kind of the dancing thing again, from what I read, you were a photographer at the same time. Did you have kind of influences, or was that kind of a natural thing that you were just doing for fun, or was that kind of intentional in some way?
Quite unintentional, because I was exploring so many different art forms. Photography was one of it, and especially because I printed myself, and so I did a lot of experimenting with putting sand on the photo paper, and then kind of different kinds of exposure with dots and kind of shaping it. It was more in alignment with doing my sculpting work. I did do some work with stone as well as with clay, and so it felt very similar. I liked the tactileness of the whole process, and I loved it. I mostly did black and white, and so when I came to the United States, of course, it was one of my go-to things to just capture what I would see. And that it was I think it was 1982 or 83. There was this massive water pipe that burst in downtown Manhattan. And I just happened to be waitressing, because that was one of my ways of how I could survive being a dancer. And so I took all of these puddle photos that were reversed. And so the trucks that were driving through it, all of their, advertising on the signs were upside down and backwards, and it looked as if it was in a different country. And so it was just that kind of playfulness. And I showed my photos to my colleagues at the restaurant, or my coworkers, and we had a part-time bartender who was also a part-time cinematography teacher at Columbia University. And he saw my photos and was like, oh my God, you have such a great eye for composition. Have you ever thought about cinematography? And I'm like, I don't know what that is. Sorry. I really have no clue. What is it? He's like,
I love French.
And it was here I was on the path of being a dancer, and somebody opened the window to the side saying, hey, look out here. This might be interesting to you. And so I pretty much went just like Alice in Wonderland through that rabbit hole, and never left. And, it is from that day on, and this is 40 years ago, I basically, I went on set. It was transformational for me to see how my dancing, my sculpting, painting with light, being part of a team, which is also the same thing when you're a dancer, all kind of came together. And then and there, I just decided that cinematography was it, and I never went off in any other direction.
What did you learn in the darkroom? Because I loved, I took, I suppose I've been a photographer my whole life, but
Uh-huh.
printing my own photos in college was definitely like, it's the most fun part. You almost don't like, this is actually maybe it's partially the reason why I became a part-time colorist, was because it feels much more like the darkroom, where it's like you get to play with the image, and it's a lot less stressful. They're like, I don't like that. You're like, okay, fine, change it up. It's not like I don't like that shot, and you're like, damn it.
Yeah, I find like nowadays when I take any snapshots, that magic of the darkroom is has certainly transformed, because there's a lot that you can do with filters and manipulating the curve and pulling in rich blacks and blossoming highlights as if you're silver printing or anything like noir. There's certain curves that you can just apply, and so it's so much simpler. I think the darkroom really taught me that it is one a really unforgiving process because you make a mistake, that's it, and that the printing process of just finding the right exposure so that all the zones really fall into place, takes some time getting used to. And I ultimately didn't have the patience for that nitty gritty fine tuning. I was more of a, let's see what happens if I do this, and and I enjoyed that. I mean, I did learn a lot. I did learn that paper is key. I find that using the right kind of paper is fantastic, and then it's also access. You got to have a dark room to really grow as a photographer if you're doing your own printing. And so once I was in New York, I didn't have the space. I was sharing with roommates. There was no way that I could create a dark room, and renting a dark room or signing in for certain hours was a bit expensive. So it very quickly, my darkroom experience ended. And so I just had different photo labs print whatever I needed, and then I got pretty quickly into printing lights of communicating, because once I started shooting feature films. And you get your dailies and you talk to the timer and you're doing your answer print, then you really start understanding the printing process for your answer print, and then for your release print, and the whatever film stock for the one doesn't necessarily mean it looks great on another once they do the release print. So that was a different phase.
Yeah, I'm actually fascinated by that, because we've had a few DPs come on the show who, started with film, and I'm interested in knowing what your sort of perspective is on, because everyone these days seems to want, the film look. We all want it to look like film, which I personally think has now aged out. I don't think people want the film look anymore. They just want a nostalgic look. Like when we were shooting on DV or whatever, of course we wanted it to look like film because nothing was better. But now that digital's perfect, I have kids coming to me and going, how'd you get that DV look? And I'm like, I shot on an XL2. Like, because they grew up with it,
Yes.
But to the initial point, I know it's ridiculous. To the initial question, just what processes do you find that you've carried over that have helped you in the digital world, whether it be exposure or workflow or that knowledge of doing working with a colorist or anything like that?
It has changed so much. These days when I shoot raw or in log, and I have a project that I do the color correction on, depending on how much time I get allotted by the post supervisor, there's so much you can do. And I think what I carried over from the just as an understanding of you know, the colors of how they intertwine, and I can easily, and actually it's funny, to this day, I still say a point less magenta. I
Colorist is
still
like,
go by points. No, and my colorist always go like, what do you mean? It's like, well, a point, it's like printing points. It's like, but anyhow, be that as it may, that is really it. It's really maybe the understanding of that there is a certain amount of latitude with what you shot on, if you shot in 4K or just straight HD, or what the latitude is of your particular project. And then it is really all about sensor technology. And that is very similar to me in terms of working with a negative, just understanding how the pixel technology of different cameras kind of translate light. And, where it was a chemical process and now it is an electricity process of where the photons just kind of ignite the sensor to create a current. And that is your, exposure. And might that be at the toe of your sensitometry curve, or might it be the shoulder? It is where that all comes together. Because obviously, there's like in terms of exposure and latitude, when you're talking about sensitometry, that most of your action is going to take place in the straight line, which is, the straightforward, stop by stop, reliable, exposure. But a lot of the shadow magic and a lot of the highlight roll off is really where these days the sensors vary greatly. And I have to say that I have been really astonished by how much the Canon sensor has pushed up into that field of being one of the top sensor technologies, because their roll-off in highlights is now so soft and has so many gradation, and also in the toe, which is first exposure, the whole magic in the shadows is just beautiful. So I end up often underexposing a little bit because the sensors are so great.
I'm shooting on a C500. Well, shooting webcamming on a C500, the most overkill webcam in the history of webcams.
Yeah, I'd say.
Do you have any? I've been working with this for I guess since it came out. I think I have serial number 8.
Oh wow!
Yeah, I was on it.
Nice.
But do you have any tips? I know, right? I need to get the engineers to sign the inside of it or something. Do you have any tips on exposing this one? Because I found kind of the same thing where I used to do the film thing of just like put the skin a stop over and then I'll drag it down in post. But more recently, I'm finding I put it all at middle. I put it dead in the center, and it works a little bit better for me. But maybe I'm doing it wrong from your experience.
No, I agree with you. I hardly ever overexpose skin any longer, just because it performs the best when you're either right on the money or when you're actually a little bit under. And it's always such a tricky thing when you're talking about exposure, because many people who start learning, like my students, they use the zebras, and I'm I keep trying to impress on them that skin tone, yes. But with documentaries, that's one thing. If you have total control of a set, you can use your light meter and your spot meter. But when you are doing cinema verite, so much of it is intuitive, and you just have to have that basic knowledge of quickly adjusting your either ISO to compensate or your f-stop to pull it into the right range, right? And very often when you use like these functions of the waveform, or you're using the zebras, dialed into whatever percentage because you think that will give you that guarantee, the truth of it is you can have, your zebras dialed into, let's say, 60% if you're not shooting log, 60%, or even if you say like 55% or 60%, right? So it's just a little bit under what people usually go for in terms of, Caucasian reflectiveness. And then that person steps into the shadow, right? Or then that person steps into the bright sunlight. So it is no guarantee. You have to always think of the entire world as an entire grayscale is represented, and you need to understand where what zone is in order to find your best exposure. And is the person really in the key light that you want to expose it for? Then maybe 65% on the zebra will work for you. But beyond that, it just is, for me, irritating to see all of these helpers. And so I do use it usually at 100% just as a warning, so that when it does pop up, especially in Verite, I know with my left eye, I see, oh, this is a window, or this is a white wall with sun hitting it. No wonder it's peaking at 100%. And so then I adjust it so that I don't have the loss of information there. But that's it. And beyond that, I just really, if I do interviews, it's like I eyeball it. But if I use it for interviews, or if somebody is a longer conversation, I do use sometimes a waveform because I shoot log, and then I try to have the skin tones no higher than 50. Yeah. It's like 45, 50, it's like kind of my base.
Do you, specifically with the C500, I don't know that 300 did it, but have you been using the false color? Because I found that kind of as a replacement for my spot meter.
Right. It's interesting. I actually am not a fan of false color.
Interesting. Okay.
And that has to do with that I live and breathe very much of the way the color works. That gives me sometimes a better clue in, I know you can program it so that it pops in and out, but for me, its color is like a very sensitive thing. And I like really how I can see mixed color work. And so that is for me more of an alarm. And that actually comes from not being able to adjust when I was shooting on negative, the mixed color. That was so detrimental. It was like so important to even out all of your different color temperatures within a set, just gelling the windows or putting out another filter and cutting down your exposure possibilities that way. It's like, I find these days, I just look, and you were talking about the Canon C500. What an amazing LCD they have. It's so
nice.
Oh my God, so in love with that. But I also really enjoy working with their viewfinder, the Canon V70. It's just beautiful. I thought that is a game changer. For me, when I'm inside and I do Verite, I only use the LCD because it is so accurate and sharp. And, I see my mixed colors right away and see what I can get away with.
Yeah, the viewfinder is definitely on my list when I can afford one. I guess
I know.
The problem is I have my own package, so it's like I could rent one, but I just want it.
I know. It's so interesting. When I started out, I'm obviously a woman, and yes, my pronouns are she and her, but when I started out in the business, because there were only 10 established female cinematographers in the field, I contacted them all when I started out in the 80s, trying to get a foot in the door by just saying, hey, can I just shadow you on set? I'm happy to work for free if I can just see how you run the set and how it all works. And specifically Diana Taylor, who was really my hero at that point, she let me visit her on set, and then ended up hiring me as well as a camera assistant. And so she took me under her wings that way.
What a dream that is.
I'm sorry?
To look up to someone and then work for them, like that must
Yeah,
be,
I know that
awesome.
was, and it was also during that time. I mean, again, there were so few camera women out in the field that everybody said to me, you know what? If you want to get anywhere in this industry, little lady, then you better then you better have your own gear, because that's the only chance you're going to get hired. And I saw my friends invest in, the Aton packages and whatnot. And the calls that they would get is like, hey, we have this great project. We'll pay you for the camera, but we can't pay you anything. And I thought, look, I'm already having a hard time as a woman starting out in the field. So I wanted to make sure that this whole gender thing was not part of it, that I actually would get hired for my skills as an artist, as a visual artist, rather than for the gender issue. And I didn't want to have the camera be kind of like the go-between. So it excluded from the get-go a lot of opportunities.
Sure.
But the people who did call me hired me for who I was and what I brought to the table. And that was a great confidence builder. And when you look back at my career, I mean, I did, after I decided on that magical day in 1982 to become a cinematographer, I mean, I worked my way up the ladder, and I shot for 4 years at Columbia University thesis films until, these scout agents, which came to the screenings, saw what I did and signed me. And that was a confidence boost. And from that point onward, it was a much easier way to step into the field. Not that it is, it wasn't handed to me in that way.
Sure.
You still, no matter what, it doesn't matter where you're at in your career, you still have to kind of find your own voice.
Yeah, it's, the gear question is always one that gets repeated, especially for younger filmmakers. And it's something I even think about all the time.
But nowadays, it's so much more affordable.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, goodness. I mean, like, there's one thing to own, like a Penelope and then have to still get the film. But now, goodness, a C70. I've been telling people, like, if you want to, if you can afford it, because obviously there's still some barrier to entry, but like if you can afford a C70, you're done. You're done. You can shoot whatever you want.
Exactly. It's a beautiful camera. It has the same, Kodak and sensor technology than the C300
Mark III.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a $10,000 sensor you have in that camera. That's not. And I think the price of the C70 is, what is it right now? Like around $6,000?
6. Yeah. And that's what I bought my C100 Mark II at.
Yeah.
And I think that was the C500 original sensor, or at least the C300 original sensor, which I liked because, it shot to SD cards and it was small and used regular batteries and all that. But even so, like, there were limitations, no 4K, which, it doesn't really matter. But these days kind of does.
It does, yeah. I mean, especially, that's because Netflix and so many of the distributors now have their, their resolution, demands of what you have to shoot on, and even check off what camera you can use.
Well, and it's funny because that is something, like, with the internet being what it is, everyone always wants to prepare. There's this innate need to be prepared, and so people will be on Reddit or whatever, like, oh, what camera should I get? These ones are Netflix approved. And it's like, oh, which films have you shot? And they're like, I haven't yet. It's like, well, I don't know if you have to worry about what Netflix wants yet. You can do whatever you want right now.
So true. So true.
Yeah. It's kind of a weird turn, but tell me about your time on Pee-wee's Playhouse.
It is so funny. People are always asking me about what you worked on.
Listen, IMDb. It's the last one. You just go, hey, there it is.
It always comes back up. Yeah, I was at that point. I was a camera assistant, and it was a multiple camera shoot, very much like a classic, on these rolling pods, and able to quickly adjust. It was really fun. I mean, I think the again for me it was very much mirroring what happened to me when I joined this initial magical day on set, where there is it's like not a tipping point. It's just like this magical line of where you're with the crew, you're making everything happen, and it's like gritty and sweaty, and then the director calls action, and then there's magic and you are in make believe, and it's beautiful and it looks gorgeous and the camera moves around. And it was similar at Pee-wee's Playhouse, where you have the genie, who of course is a real man, just with the makeup on the head, but then underneath and shorts and a t-shirt.
That wasn't that Morpheus?
The
The guy who played Morpheus. Oh no, that was Cowboy Curtis. But
it's like these characters that appeared, or the comfy chair, with the arms, or the little robot. I mean, there's no people in there, cramped for hours, waiting for the cue, take after take. But we had so much fun. It was a great camaraderie, and partially because Pee-wee made it so. He was very much into acting with the crew, and very normal, but with a sense of humor. I had the best time, I really have to say. It was kind of a very colorful set, and a great crew, especially the puppeteers were amazing.
Yeah. What did you learn from a production side from that experience, and what did you learn from like a directing or sort of upper level side?
Well, keep in mind I was a camera assistant, so I just did what I was told.
Sure. But from observation, because we would all love to be on any set,
Exactly. But I think, the set was run fairly smoothly, as I remember. And from production point of view, there wasn't really any, I've been on sets where the crew did not feel respected or neglected, in a sense of where they didn't give promised breaks, on time, or went endlessly into overtime. And, it was a unionized set. And as far as I remember, our shop steward, it's like there was no problem when we would go over. It was just, 15 minutes into meal break penalty, and everybody was asked and was pretty much above board. But from a directing point of view, I think I don't really recall the director at all.
Sure.
I recall Pee-wee pretty much doing what he wanted to do, and he was really in charge of when he felt it was good or when he wanted another take. And I do remember that the genie, sometimes those damn doors would jam. He would try to open up and ask the genie for advice, and the door wouldn't open up. Things like that,
Sure.
that kind of are memorable. But it was not a big set. It was pretty small,
Yeah. The kind of going back to the camera thing and sort of young filmmakers. One thing about Julia that I noticed was really great food cinematography. And the one thing that YouTube loves is B-roll. B-roll has become the A-roll for a lot of filmmakers. And I think it's just because it's a lot easier to do B-roll than to write a script, Yeah. But I was kind of wondering, just to kind of kick off the questioning of the films, how did you approach shooting that? And like, were you bringing any influences in, or were you just kind of like, because that's just pure, literal food porn. You get to do whatever you want, make it look as pretty as you can. So like, what was your approach there?
Well, it's really interesting because Betsy and Julie and I, we certainly had some conversations about how we would approach the food, and they were pretty much set on that they wanted to be abstract, where you kind of didn't know what it was at first. And so they were looking for a commercial cinematographer who could provide that. And so they had a friend recommend a Parisian cinematographer who specialized on abstract food shoots. And he was fantastic. It's Nanda. I always say his last name, Nanda Fernandez Brilliard, I think is his last name, pronounced correctly. But forgive me, Nanda, if I mispronounced your name. But anyway, I really thought that he was the right fit. He was just excellent at bringing these macro shots into the world because. But it's kind of like the cherry on top, it's like you have to build up to that moment. And that certainly fell into my lap. And we also knew from the get-go that we had certain recipes where we would be going step by step, where we would have Susan, our food specialist and cook, do go and go through these steps. So all of that needed to have it was kind of like a transition element of coming from the archival footage of Julia in the kitchen to Susan handling just with her hands and obviously not seeing and revealing her face in Julia's recreated kitchen, that go-between that then was kind of like with cherry on top by Nanda, and so it all kind of intertwined in a beautiful way. And I know you asked me, another part of this question was, what were my influences?
Yeah, I was assuming that you had shot those sequences, but I suppose with any film, I feel like a lot of people, maybe you didn't, but pull in sort of visual references or something like that. Like not necessarily we want it to look like this, but this is kind of the vibe that we're going for. And I was wondering if you had any of those.
And we did. I mean, again, Julie, Betsy, and I, we did talk about it. And Betsy and Julie were very adamant about that. They didn't want to have it look like the chef's
table.
Chef's table. They didn't want it to be presented that way. And they wanted to have a different way of getting to the food. And I said to them, like, look, I mean, food is emotional. You eat something, you have an experience, and you want to present it to the audience as such. And so how can we visually capture the aroma? Because obviously they can't taste it. And how can we, activate their sense of yearning to taste it and their sense of that they can nearly smell it, right? How can you make that work? And so there were elements in Chef's Table. There was a very first episode which really struck me because there's one tiny shot in it where the camera floats. And as it floats, it's verite, and as it floats, I felt as the viewer as if I could smell it. It was that vapor, it's just translated through a slight camera move. And so I was very much inspired by that. But yet, because I didn't want it to look like that, which was really referring to lighting, I knew that I had to work more to anchor Julia's kitchen in reality, meaning period, faded colors, more period lighting, which is more source motivated, of a door, a window, a slash of light, and using that as consistent motivations to backlight it and give it a certain glow. But then bringing that element of doing handheld work and really trying to capture it as it happens. That was my take on creating that bridge so that the audience feels as if you're with your mom or with your grandma, with somebody who cooks really well in your family, and you are somewhat just watching and salivating and can't wait until it is being presented to you so that you can take a bite. And I thought we were very successful.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's all gorgeous. I think I
And you know
remember.
what? In terms of, I'm sorry to interrupt. In terms
No,
of
no,
the macro photography of Nanda, there were because he used a different camera than I did in Paris, and you see, it was during COVID, and so nobody could fly over. It was all via telephone communication, and then he would send us the images in log of what he had shot. But he also shot everything against a black background, and so the contrast level was of a different nature. And when you're doing macro commercial photography, very often it is not. You have certain ways of substituting certain more glistening ingredients than
right,
actually what is used. Whereas coming from Julia, uh, it was very much everybody can do this. This is how it really looks like. And so in the kitchen, um, and we shot also plenty of close-ups in that kitchen without hands in there. But um, you know, the approach was, again, it was period. So there were no pure blacks. And I felt
right.
that that was really important, to find that transition so that Nanda's footage would really stand out as the ultimate food porn.
Yeah, yeah. I think it might have been Anthony Bourdain who said that it was the explosion of Food Network was likely due to 9/11 because people wanted to find comfort.
Yeah.
And I'm noticing kind of the same thing now where, Great British Bake Off, for instance,
Oh,
is
yeah.
everyone's about it and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I found that the Julia documentary does give you kind of that same joyful feeling.
Yes. Yes.
And learning she was kind of a naughty lady. Like that's kind of fun.
I know. But look, and if you look at the recent films that I was really engaged in, uh,
They're
I
kind of
am.
intense.
Yeah, but they're also very often about feminists or leading women
Right.
that establish their own path. And in a way, I identify so much with that because I had to do the same thing. I had to establish my own path because there were so few women in the field. And, even today, I still have to assure that I can handle all technology that's being thrown at me and any kind of situation. But that makes you look at other people with much more appreciation. So when I embarked on telling the story visually with about Julia Child, um, that was key. Really being able to identify with her and seeing a bit of myself in her, of you know being a bit too tall.
Sure.
Not that I'm that tall. I'm not 6'2", but I am, 5'10". And so when you put some shoes, even
Taller
sneakers,
than
even
me.
flat
Yeah.
shoes, then you end up being pretty tall. And that can be, you stick out. Let me just say it. You just stick out when you're tall. And so not necessarily, for me, it was also, uh, I don't know if I want to really go into that. I'm going to sidestep my inner thoughts on that topic of appearance.
Sure.
But Julia Child was just not considered a beauty, and she didn't fit into what was asked of her, partially because of her height and partially because of her, rebellion against her parents of what they asked of her, of getting married at that time period when she was, supposed to get married. And she didn't, she was not interested in that, and she found her own path. And I really related to that tremendously. So I was highly motivated to do her justice. And I
Sure.
think the film really does, because everybody who succeeds in one way or another kind of inspires those who follow suit, right? And her having a career blossom at 50, that is late in the game for, many people. And I think, her nature of things, shit happens and things fall down, and just pick it back up. This lightheartedness of embracing one's own mistakes um, is a key element to success. That you can, if you understand that you won't be perfect, and that when you make a mistake, you own it, and you don't own it with shame. I mean, I'm talking about mistakes that obviously don't harm other people, but mistakes
Right.
in terms of your own performance, but you own it and you have a sense of humor about it, you become vulnerable and so much more approachable. And if you are approachable, people are willing to give you, the support that you need to succeed. So I thought it's a brilliant message.
Yeah, that's genuinely one of the things that that was a huge lesson for me that, I hesitate to say changed my life because that's such like a strong statement, but being able to not so much admit fault, because that was easy for me. It was not carrying that burden of the failure with me and treating it like a lesson. Okay, did I learn the lesson? Yes. Do I know what it is? Cool. I can let go of the failure itself. You don't need to carry,
Yeah.
it's like the way I
Yeah.
heard it described was, actually, this is the way religion was described to me, but it's the same concept. It's you get across the river with a boat. You don't need to carry the boat with you
Yeah,
after you get to the
exactly.
other side. That's
Yeah,
silly.
yeah, yeah. Exactly. Exactly. So well put. Yeah, I
Yeah.
feel and I can echo that. I mean, the strive, maybe I don't really know how it affects men in our society. I know that there are social norms that everybody wants to live up to, and that are, in our books and our schooling and in the behavior, sometimes just so, they're like blind spots. You're just being taught something without really asking if it's valid.
Yeah.
But um, when you understand that you are imperfect, and therefore have the power to embrace your imperfection in a society that teaches you ultimately always to be perfect, and specifically women to be perfect, because there is unfortunately this worth or value system that is placed on women's appearance of you have worth if you are beautiful and sexy. And that is your currency that you are trying to negotiate and, move forward. But it doesn't really embrace of how smart you are. And very often, if you are showing that you are really brilliant and smart, then it's being held against you. Or if you're really determined and a tough negotiator, well, then you might end up being called a bitch.
Right.
And if you are, not standing, or if you are even daring on set to speak up and say, like, nope, I disagree with the director and the producer, you're making the wrong choice. Ooh, you better fall in line.
Right.
Girl, you stepped just one step too far over the line. Whereas I see, and I have seen through all of my years in the business, that that's much more forgiven for men. That's kind of like, the bonding that takes place, of the wrestling of, I have this opinion, you have that opinion, but they have that kind of communication set from the get-go. That's part of how they communicate. They can just be direct. But as a
Yeah.
woman, you're not allowed to be that direct without, upsetting. some some people's toes.
Some sensitive people. Yeah. I will say for men it's interesting if you are sensitive on the offset. I was a pretty sensitive kid growing up.
Mhm.
And you don't communicate in that kind of roughhousing direct way, you're out. You don't get invited to the friend groups.
Right?
You get kicked out immediately. In regards to it, that was very frustrating. I had to learn how to be like masculine, I suppose, in the
Yeah,
very coarse
yeah,
way, you know.
to fit into a certain norm. And I also had to adapt. It was very tricky because here you are on the set that is predominantly, men, except for maybe the makeup or the wardrobe department.
Yeah,
Um, you know, and you think you can step into that masculine behavior, but you're not allowed to because as a woman, or at least now it's not so much, but then when I started out, there was very strict behavior that was tolerated, and everything else was, like, she's
right.
overstretching her, her welcome here.
Yeah. Have you found that it's gotten better over the years? Because I mean, going back to the idea of the way you look too, like goodness, it seems like every industry is more looks driven than ever. You know, you look at in the influencer economy is mostly hot chicks in bikinis. Like,
My goodness, yes, that has become the currency. Absolutely. It's the eye candy, and it's because there's an overflow of information. And so obviously, the audience is attracted to something specific, but it only lasts so long. If you
sure,
don't deliver, no matter how you look, if you don't deliver the goods with some wit and some laughter, people are not going to stay. They're not going to stick around for the blog or whatever you're trying to communicate. So I think it just lasts maybe for the door to be opened.
sure.
And
Do
that
you?
is already a great thing. But I mean, it is, look, our film industry is a youth oriented industry. It has always been. And once you get to the level of where you're really experienced, then what counts is really your work, your body of work, and then how you uh, adapt to the different challenges. And it's just, I find that people, when I started out, they were at times, there were just so many expectations on either side, producing, directing, crew, that would butt heads, where all of a sudden everybody felt, oh, I'm disrespected,
Right.
or
Oh goodness.
whatever. But, and I understand that because they had all their expectations. But when you have been in the industry for a while, and I have been in the industry for 40 years, nearly 40 years, 38 years to be exact. No, it's, yeah, no, it's nearly 40 years. 82. Yeah, 22 next year. Crazy.
Goodness. Yeah, a
But
couple of
when
those
you,
years disappeared on us.
true, true. But you have a different perspective. And I find, and maybe because it's my extensive training in documentaries, because you meet so many different characters, and because the diplomacy that is asked of me as a self-directed camera woman when I'm doing cinema verite, just that sensitivity to really understand somebody's emotional pulse, right? That you have so much more empathy, and
Yeah.
therefore you can quickly decipher why people try to set limits, and doesn't matter if it's a budgetary thing or if it is a schedule thing or if they want to limit something. You have a better understanding, and therefore the communication can be much more focused, so that the other entity, let's say the producers, are like, oh, we don't have that money for that. It's like, it's not butting heads any longer. It's a more of a recognition of, well, this project has this amount of funding, and if this is really necessary, how can we make the other parts work? And so it becomes a much more focused conversation, and much more of there's more access to a quicker solution, just because the experience that you bring to the table. And that is very different from when you're starting out, because you haven't done enough projects to compare them and to really understand how to fine tune, the conversations.
Yeah, that's a toughie, especially because, correct me if this isn't the case, but there are certain situations where the answer is not like, like we were talking about, everyone likes to be really prepared. Sometimes the answer is there's no preparation. You just have to do it. I can tell you how to snowboard, but until you're on the mountain, you're not going to experience what it's like to slide around. I can't tell you what a toe edge feels like. Is that kind of the same case, like getting on set? Is there like, a book someone could read, or maybe some therapy someone could do to figure out how to get close before they step on set? Or is that mostly just like you're going to get punched in the jaw and that's how it's going to go?
I always try to relate it to when you are an artist, what counts is your body of work. Nobody is going to say like, oh, you have a degree in what? Let me see your art.
Yeah.
That's the question, right? So doing it is really the key to build your experience and to really be able to negotiate your career. Yes, you can have a lot of book knowledge. And certainly these days, there's so many videos available if you want to get familiar with certain cameras, or you can, dive definitely into the technology of the sensor technology or the optics, or, all of that is available on the internet, and it gives you a base, but it keeps you very hungry, I'd say. Keeps you hungry in order to really be involved, because when you're learning, you have your own timeline. You can go and get a snack, and then maybe tomorrow you see the other half of that video. But when you're on set, it is rapid fire. It is, here's the situation, go do it. And I think that is really where everything is tested. And that is where the experience of what to let go of. If you're saying, oh, I have this great idea, I want to do these cool rack focuses, and then you're on set and you're doing your first rack focus and you don't hit the end mark right, or it was too late and then the person already moved, then you have lost that entire moment. And so certain conceptual or, cinematic approaches just fly right out the window, because there's not the time there to do so. And you find your way when it is appropriate to play cinematically and when it is just meat and potatoes, because the emotional dynamic is demanding of a different style of cinematography. And knowing what to let go of and how to forge forward is only possible once you've had experience, because you understand the timing of things. And once you step on set, that emotional dynamic will present itself. And you can sense when something drastically happens, when, some sort of major tipping point is happening, because the key thing is that you're listening. You're not only watching body language, which for me as a dancer is key.
Sure.
For me, that is, he's about to duck, swing the camera over, right? and having my,
that's actually fascinating. I didn't even think about that, but you can watch the subject and know how they're going to move. Oh, that's cool. That's really cool.
And it is, and thank goodness, if you look back in time and you have that eyepiece, and even with the Canon viewfinder, the V70, it's like how your peripheral vision is not there, and you probably are going to squint too in order to just focus on what you're focusing, but with the LCD of the new Canon C500, that is amazing, because it frees you up. All your periphery is ready. I can see somebody reacting right over here or making a move, which then motivates me. I know, 3, 2, 1, he's entering. I can start and hide my camera motion on my stepping with that person who's entering, and that person will lead me down, and I can then let them go and end up in a close-up on another subject. right? So all of that, using your periphery that way. And when I am in a dialogue-driven scene, it is so important to not chase the conversation, but to have the timing that you can listen and know what's happening before the other person. If they're only interjecting, you let that go. But if they're really starting to ramp up for an oppositional statement, then you can make your move of rotating around, going over the shoulder, passing past the shoulder. I mean, it's so delicious. I am really a big fan of verite.
Yeah, well, and it's the fun part. I was gonna say the being able to see everywhere is the reason why I like shooting my my viewfinder stills camera, because you get that big area around it and really helps with composition. But it is that weird thing of trying to make verite cinematic, right? Because in a scripted sense, you know that person's gonna enter the door, so you can set that up. But being able to anticipate it in the moment is absolutely a learned skill, but also just one that is I think valuable to anyone, even if you're just trying to get into. I correct me if I'm wrong, but I would argue that shooting a lot of verite would absolutely make you a better scripted cinematographer.
Interesting. So because I would have to think about that. Since I started out in doing 10 years feature films, and being trained to really conceptualize, the dolly, the move in and around, and the coverage and the line, the 180 rule line in terms of not crossing the line, or when you do a transition shot, and so on and so forth. That for me was key to do good coverage when you do verite.
I'm going to revise my statement. Having that base, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have interrupted you, but now I'm.
No, that's okay. Okay, go ahead.
But I'm coming from the perspective of, I went to film school, and I won't say I have the same base knowledge you do, but the cinematic language was beat into me before I did. I wouldn't say documentary, but just doing anything where it's kind of like run and gun, kind of, hey, we're going to shoot this commercial for, I don't know, an apartment, and you just kind of have to, okay, and you're always handheld and stuff. Is more what I was talking about, not starting as a documentarian. But I'm sorry, I should not have interrupted you. That was my bad.
It's all okay. I like the spontaneous conversation, because they're very lively that way. I don't mind it, in other words. You can interject anytime.
Thank you.
So for me, that knowledge that I gained through the feature films was all about coverage, all about the line, and be very sharp of when, you're crossing the line and why you're crossing the line. Is there a real shift in the scene where you can make that work? And traditionally, people don't cross the line in feature films. In dramatic work, that's a no-no, unless you can give the audience an orientation where that it becomes part of the style of where they can accept from the get-go. Oh, I know the layout of, this particular scene, of where the windows are, where the doors are, so that if you move back and forth across the line, then it becomes a style and the audience doesn't lose their perspective. That's key. But I learned that on when I was shooting feature films. And in terms, therefore, it helped me tremendously to be spontaneous, because in the back of my mind, I was saying like, okay, I'm on the line, but I'm not across the line. I can go there because he just crossed the line. So that's the natural transition. All of that really helped me to be spontaneous. And also with lighting, I mean, the amount of lighting that you do in a controlled set, you learn very quickly that, hey, I can't put my camera angle here. That means I have to do a whole relight. I can't just, the director says, well, I want to shoot in sequence. And you go like, oh my gosh, shoot in sequence? Are you out of your mind? You know how many relights? We don't have the hours in the day to do that, right? So you learn very quickly of how to truncate and jump in the timeline in order to not have these relights. And that inform me again when I'm on set and I'm shooting something. I always think of the relight, but there are no lights. You know what I mean? It's like that's the amazing thing. There are no lights. It's all natural lighting. But I'm thinking of the relight because I'm thinking, oh, the sun is going to be moving. And if I put myself over to the left and shoot the master from there, then my coverage is blah, 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 blah. And I'm not going to shoot into the windows because the sun is going to be setting and, or it'll be complete silhouette. I can't have that intercut in a regular lit dialogue, so it informs me of how I go about my verite.
Yeah, with something like Julia or even I think RPG to a degree, a lot of archival footage.
Yeah,
but Fauci, not so much. Oh, also, yeah, was that actually a consideration? Was you just have to chuck a bunch in there?
Oh my God, of course. Oh. I started Julia. My name is Polly Mary. And what was another doc? Oh yeah, it was the code. No, not the Code Breaker. Oh, the Ballerina Boys, which was a 1 hour, documentary on the Trocaderos de Monte Carlo. It's a ballerina troupe, a male ballerina troupe, and so. When you start before COVID, then you have to adjust during COVID. And all of a sudden it was all shrunk down to what is possible. And shooting Julia was therefore, the verite in terms of being with cooks in the kitchen. There was this whole talk of me shooting people in the kitchen, preparing different recipes. That did not happen. We tried it and then it became just way too risky of, in close contact and, 6 feet away on a long lens with your heartbeat.
Everything's at 150. You're just all right.
Exactly. But I have to say, using the C500, I was just shooting a project and I did so much handheld work on the 135 at T2, 2.2. Widest opening, handheld. And it was beautiful.
Were you using the stabilizer? No, okay. Not even the electronic one?
Nothing. I used nothing. Oh. And it was, it turned out beautiful. It was a problem because, with the Cinema Primes, you can't have stabilization. It doesn't really work when you have not a lens that communicates with the body.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
So that doesn't, with the Cinema Prime, it just didn't work.
I was able to use my Nikkor primes, the old AIS ones, with stabilization, but I had to tell the camera what lens it was.
Okay.
I was like, oh, this is a 50. And then it goes, all right. But I'm wondering, I'd have to look back and see if that footage looks weird at all. Because I don't have any stabilized lenses.
Yeah, I mean, I don't either because I shoot on primes predominantly. I mean, I'm deeply infatuated with the Canon Cinema Primes. They, for Julia, I use predominantly the 50 Cinema Prime because, it gives me close focus to the sensor at 18 inches. So you're about 8 inches away from the food.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like smelling distance,
Yeah. Was Julia on the 300 or the 500?
No, we shot that on the 300 Mark II.
Yeah.
Because we started out, and so I had to stay true to that sensor. I didn't want to mix it up. But yeah, at smelling distance, 6 or 8 inches away from the front element of the prime, and boy, that was so much fun because, of course, your focus is very shallow at that point, and you want it to be shallow so that just the same way as your eyes would focus on something that close, you go to the most attractive part, which is, of course, the colors and the juice and that asparagus with the hollandaise on there,
Yeah. Walk me through kind of how you go about lighting just a sort of a traditional interview. Like you sit down with Anthony Fauci or whoever, and
that was so much fun with Fauci. I mean, it's interesting. My lighting has really changed. When I started out, it was all drama because I came from black and white photography. I loved drama, and
stop ratios.
Exactly. Absolutely minimum fill light. But then, as I grew older, as I discovered that. It is most important to show whoever you're interviewing that they're human, they're vulnerable. There's something in the skin tones that is fragile, right? Even though that we all feel so invincible. And so my lighting became much more Vermeer motivated. Jan Vermeer, my biggest influence in life, I have to say and admit. I think, because I studied painting, so the traditional Rembrandt lighting and Vermeer lighting, but the whole Dutch education that I had with Jan de Hoch and Frans Hals and, all of these certainly influenced my composition, but Vermeer definitely influenced my lighting. And so soft single source lighting with very little backlight is what you will see in most of my interviews these days. And I think that my approach, I hated flat lighting, really don't like flat lighting. But nowadays I shoot usually with 3 cameras. It's a multi-camera shoot for interviews. And so if you have women and you do a fashion light approach, I love the Hudson Spider light. I really love the Sky 60 going through an octa. And that just with a little bit of a bounce card, like B-board underneath to fill in, that area right here and then of course the right optics and the right filtration makes their skins glow. And I think partly that is due because the cinema primes have a wonderful way of how they refract. And so there's this glow that happens through the optics, and each lens has a different quality, but that's what I really love and the coloration of it. And so front lighting with multiple cameras then for different angles becomes, looks like a side light, but it's just beautiful because then it falls off. I use a lot of negative fill so that I can milk that. And in that case, when I do front lighting, then I do some, multi-source backlighting.
Have you seen, just a quick little detour, have you seen Penn Jillette's documentary, Tim's Vermeer?
Oh, yes. Oh, fabulous, isn't it?
I love that documentary. I'm a giant Penn and Teller fan, but I grew up as I was a magician before I was a filmmaker.
I think I saw that a while back. Didn't that come out like 10 years ago or something, or even further back? But yes, fabulous.
What's your take on the thesis there?
Remind me of the thesis, because I remember that they were talking about it, but quite honestly, I can't recall. Camera obscuro.
Basically, his idea was, he built a camera into a room, or actually, no, it wasn't even that. His initial thesis was Vermeer built a camera and painted in a dark room, but then found out he could just use a mirror and kind of shift his head a little bit and could just paint the reflected item perfectly.
Exactly. And it's really interesting because a couple of my friends who love painting as a hobby, they have told me numerous times of that some of the images, there's a friend of mine who just loves famous paintings, that are unaffordable, whatever it is, and she just paints them herself. And so she takes it and projects it. and traces it that way on a big canvas. And then she does her own interpretation and alters the colors and, has a blast doing that. But it's very similar to Vermeer's approach ultimately, because you're getting the proportions more accurate,
Do you think
with a slight distortion, of course?
Yeah. Do you think now I'm interested. Do you think it matters if he did it by hand, so to speak, or if he, I guess traced is the wrong word, but hello. That's Vermeer's lawyer.
Sorry, I just need to switch this off. Does it matter? It doesn't matter to me at all. I mean, I think we all use some sort of tools in order to express ourselves. And, I don't paint anymore. I mean, I do some watercolors, but I don't paint the way I used to paint. I use the camera, and isn't the camera a tool that everybody uses? And does it therefore nullify my artistry? I don't think so. I think, it's like just because I use a camera doesn't mean that my lighting is the same or the way that my the art of exposure doesn't apply any longer, So
Yeah.
it doesn't matter to me. And I think that windows or sourced motivation, like window light motivation, is always giving the audience, or I should say not only window light, but any kind of motivated source for lighting will tie in your environment and your subject in such a beautiful way that the audience will feel as if the window to that world is real and authentic. And so when I set up at location my lighting, I usually go with what I see in the background, and then the foreground of how I do my foreground lighting mimics somewhat what I see and set out in the background. So there might not be any windows around me, but I will create that window to echo what I see in the background in my framing, because that is important to me. I want a sense that how we live and how we present a topic or a person, an expert or a impacted person who's sharing their heartfelt story, that atmosphere, that mood is essential for fine-tuning the audience's receptors of how to soak up the information and ultimately have identify and have sympathy, empathy.
Yeah. How do you have any sort of like compositional inspiration, or how did you find? I mean, you said earlier you were born with it, but how did you find that eye? What interests you? Because it's something that I won't say I'm struggling with right now, but I'm wondering if there's something left on the table that I'm not finding with my compositions.
See,
how did you train it?
Yeah, it is. It's so interesting. I think for me, I think the most important thing for documentary, especially cinema verite, is to train your curiosity rather than being concerned with my composition. Yes, it is important how you choreograph your shot or how you, kind of use the form. I think for me, it's just because I had years of training and I grew up in a very artsy household that was just part of the nature of things. But I find when I'm teaching to my students, the one thing that is incredibly difficult to sync up with them is, how do you access your curiosity? Because if you are with friends, right? Let's just say, here's a perfect example. You're playing a game. It's game night at your friend's house. You're coming over. It's an interesting game that's fast, full of laughter. Where does your eye go to experience what's going on? Right. Because you don't want to miss a beat because you're in competition. So your heightened awareness will make you feel very focused. So that is the type of curiosity you want to train as a cinema verite shooter, and also as a cinematographer in general, because I think when you're curious, you find it. It is when it's so often it is. You got to get into the flow. You have to feel pretty organic with whatever you're in, whatever your scene is that you're trying to capture. If you personally and emotionally don't connect, then your curiosity is not activated. And so I think that for me is the key. You got to find a way in by being motivated and curious about what's happening. And if that is there, then it will fall into place, because you just want to get close, or you just want to step back, or.
And that informs lens choice as well, right? If you want to get closer, if you want to get wide.
Yeah, so interesting, because these days I shoot so much of the verite on primes, which has which is great, but it also has its pitfalls, because you have to switch lenses, at an opportune time, right. Or if on the interesting, I go back to my favorite lens now, which is a 50 millimeter cinema prime by Canon. I end up using that as my verite lens for full frame.
Yeah.
Because full frame, it's just the playground. It's like my canvas is just so big that a 50 feels like a 35, and then it becomes easier to just step closer. But when you're shooting on just the Super 35 sensor rather than on full frame, I would go to the 35. But it also means that when you're stepping close, your subject will know that you're close.
Yes.
And that has a psychological power, and they have to accept you. But then you're also giving them notice, hey, I'm coming close. I want to be close. And there's a psychological play there where silently you can demand a response. I can walk up to somebody who is in dialogue, who hasn't said anything or just listened. But the minute I walk up, I'm demanding a response, and they will feel it, and then they want to say something, or they'll walk away. Either way, there's a certain amount of as if you are in the conversation, but silently with a prime lens. Whereas when I switch over to my other favorite Canon lens, which is the 17 to 120, which I shoot on the Super 35 sensor with in verite, and that will, goes to a 120. I mean, I can be at a distance and still get a close up, and nobody knows. And so it's more observational rather than being in the action and letting your subjects know. So it's like sometimes, there's pros and cons. With a prime lens also, and this is the last thing I'll say to that, is you have to have the space. It's like if you're in a small space, prime lens, I find you have to accept the fact that when you're using prime lenses, you got to move. You have to be able to move and dance with everybody in the room. In terms of going over the shoulder, you got to come up close when you're on the 35 or the 50, right? And if you're switching over to the 135, you got to make sure that you have that playfulness that tilts up and down to whatever activity it is. Or like I had the scene where everybody was sharing with 6 wonderful women who were sharing and reminiscing about photos, and they were sharing it. And I was on the 135, and I was super tight, and I was just able to float perfectly to these little, tiny photos, but you could still see them. And even though it was a shallow depth of field, but you could really carve out where the focus was, and then going back up to their beautiful expressions and their little stories. But then it becomes a smaller playing ground in which you operate. I also like to think of shooting verite as if you're writing. It's like
Mm.
shooting in sentences. I don't go in and just like, oh my God, it's, run and gun, just point the camera and shoot. That's kind of like as if I say in a sentence, house or tree, and it's just fragmented, right? But if you think of it as once upon a time, there was a house in the woods, right? You already know that there's a surrounding, a location where you're singling out something. And my next sentence is, and I was ringing the bell, but there was no bell to be found, right? So then you already have that interaction. So if you, in your mind, write the sentence and then translate it into a visual sentence, then you have like mini masters, and these mini sentences of panning from one element to the other then become very much, a sentence, a paragraph, a story.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic advice. And also like a lot of the documentarians I've spoken to have all spoken about that interaction with
I
the.
think am I
Hmm?
vanishing in terms of lighting? Let's see if
Oh, it's
this
a
happens.
little dark. Yeah.
I don't know if you can see me still.
Well, we're actually coming up on time. I was gonna
We can do this.
unfortunately
Wait.
just yeah move it
Just
over.
going to see like this.
There you go. Uh, well, I'll let you go in a sec. I actually did have a quick question about filtration and full frame. I have found that shooting on the C500, I don't really use diffusion anymore. I found that having all the pixels has made it so that everything kind of is naturally smooth, and putting filtration on just makes things fuzzy. Have you kind of seen that?
It's interesting. I haven't paid that much attention to it, but it probably is why I use the Hollywood Magic filtration for the Julia studio kitchen shoots. And
Hmm.
maybe that's why it worked so darn well. I have to really do a comparison, which I haven't done, because I find that the lensing is so super sharp, and the filtration that I use is I used a quarter. Mm, yeah, that's the fusion. But beyond that, I usually shoot without.
Yeah.
It's really more for I don't use Promise anymore. I did a documentary called The Bit Player, where I had four different uh, periods that I had to portray. One was the 1920s, one was 1948, one was in the 80s, and then the present time. And during that time, just playing with heavy filtration, especially for creating like a silver printing look, and obviously for the noir look, I used these wonderful, soft FX filters, like
Yeah.
1/2 and 1, because it was shot at night, and it worked beautifully. I mean, there was it was fascinating to me. I would have never dared from my previous experiences to push the envelope with heavy filtrations, but it just called for it, and it worked really well. But again, there's so much you can do in post these days. I mean, if I do my color correction in post, sometimes I lay over a grainy look, just because it needs to look more filmic, or more like 16 millimeter. Sometimes I just literally create shafts of light.
Yep.
It's like, okay, you gotta just give me a form right over here with a couple of shafts of light. I didn't do that in Fauci, though. Fauci was all real shafts of light
Yeah. No,
on
that's
set.
something I agree. Like nowadays I'm kind of getting the cleanest image I can, and
Yeah,
even that both exposure wise, you're collecting data with these
yeah,
sensors now. You're not really creating the image until it hits
yeah.
resolve or baselight or whatever. And then from there you can just massage and do whatever you want. Like I said, we are coming up on time, which is unfortunate. So I'd like to wrap it up with the same questions. And since you're a documentarian, there's actually a third question. So
Okay.
the first one is, can you recall, it doesn't have to be the piece of advice, but can you recall a piece of advice that really stuck with you that helped you along in your career, or maybe life, but probably career?
Well, in terms of my career, I think to get into the business, when you're coming out of film school, I advise that you set your expectations to devoting 2 years to just get into the business. And that perseverance is everything it's 80% of being successful in our business. That's the one thing. The second thing is, when you're a shooter, what happens if the scene is really exciting to you, then time warps.
Yep.
Where you go and you hold on an amazing emotional reaction, and then you're like, oh my God, that was so amazing. Okay, now I get the other one. And you rush because your adrenaline is so ignited that you are cutting it too short. So don't be fooled by your own adrenaline when you are in a highly emotional cinema verite scene or in an action-packed scene. Count to 10. That's my advice. Hold your horses before you move the camera. Obviously, if it's an action, then you just follow organically, but hold your horses, count to 10. It's a simple thing, but in the edit room, you'll be happy to have done that.
Yeah, I'm nodding and smiling because for the longest time I used to shoot concerts, right?
Uh-huh.
And that was a lot of fun. And when something cool would happen, I had this instinct to stop rolling. I would get really excited, and then I'd hit the button and try to get another shot. And it was just like, I'd get in the edit and I'm like, what am I doing? And for the longest time, I would just shoot at 60 so I could slow it down and give myself a tail.
That's interesting.
Very lazy, but yeah, I have now. Even now, I have to roll my finger off the trigger and just like.
Yeah, it is. Don't touch it. Don't touch it. I know the trigger can be tricky. There was a time period when I would be shooting on the C300, the first model. And when you would record, you obviously have your display, but I don't like the display because it compromises my sense of composition.
Yeah.
And I have to have a clean, image in front of me and not cluttered with details. Nowadays, you can do so that it's just
get the border one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if you would click display off, it would also remove your record display.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And so I have been, unfortunately, in the situation where I was sure I was recording and I was like, wow, this is the coolest thing. And then, okay, cut. And I clicked it and then it started recording. It's like, oh my God, what did I do? And that is, the hardest part, because that's when you have to own your mistake. And I think it is important that you don't fear that you can go up to the director producer and say, like, I am so sorry, but I had technical difficulties. It just turns out that this last scene I didn't capture.
I got all the conversations in between. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry. We will just have to find another way to bring that topic back up for them to discuss. Do it while you're there. Don't do it. Don't. You have to. It's like the responsibility. It's the right thing to do, to be truthful.
Well, and something I learned I used to work for Red Bull, and I made a mistake that stuck with me forever. But just for anyone listening, pull someone aside and tell them that. Don't run up to the director and shout the mistake you've made. Pull them aside quietly, whoever it is. Or if you have to reprimand someone, even worse. But don't do it in front of everyone. Do it softly to the side.
Yeah, that's set etiquette. Very, very important.
Yeah. Second question. a little easier. A movie that you think people should see. Any movie.
Okay, for documentaries, my all-time favorite movie right now is still Honeyland.
Oh yeah.
Honeyland is a movie that completely embraces, beautiful lighting, great composition, great verite. Images really stand by themselves and tell story. It's just amazingly beautifully photographed. Of course, they had 3 years to do so, and complete access. And sometimes that is key in order to be playful. But there are just moments in there where you go like, oh my goodness, how did they capture that? When the little girl nearly drowns, they were right there and photographed it. And my heart was racing. Just, did they not have that responsibility to yell out? Because you don't see the cameraman shifting, away from it. He just holds the camera, or cameraman. It was a cameraman actually, but holding on the water with the kids all playing, right? Hopefully, the director was actually alerting the parents, because then she was rescued right away. But those moments are the moments when the little baby, the toddler, is being stung by the bees, and you keep thinking, as a filmmaker and as a camera person, don't you have the responsibility to stop everything and rescue the kid? But again, we don't know if not somebody else is being...
You can cut that audio out.
Yeah, exactly. You can cut that audio out, right? Or
yeah, you can be filming and go, help!
Exactly. So anyway, that is one of my favorites. But there are so many. I mean, gosh, right now I love the film The Rescue. Or not The Rescue. Yeah, not The Rescue. I love that film too, but I really thought that the First Wave, shot by a dear friend of mine and some other DPs as well, but he did the most.
You talking about Thor?
Thor, yes, exactly.
I interviewed him about Boy State.
Oh, fantastic! Yeah, we worked on Boy State together. So
I did see that.
We have this camera collective. There's 6 of us, and we jump into each other's shoes quite frequently, because documentary schedules can overlap, and sometimes you're not available, but you have started that project. And so we wanted to create a group that can really support each other, where we all can easily adapt to somebody's style and have the experience to be just a good fit, and also put the directors and producers at ease. And so we have this camera collective, and Thor had, said, look, I'm doing this film on Boy State. There are 1,700 campers. I cannot photograph that by myself. I want our team to go, and we work as self-directed DPs. Each person will get a character, and that's how we're going to make it happen. And we did. It was great.
Yeah, Thor's awesome. I love that conversation.
Yeah, he's fantastic. Yeah. And so he shot the First Wave, which is a beautiful film, and I would not be surprised if it isn't nominated. Matter of fact, aren't the shortlists supposed to come out today?
That's a good question.
Yes, they actually just came out. Oh. Claudia Julia is actually on the short list for documentary feature.
Hey!
That's nice. That's sweet.
That's so cool.
And the First Wave, I believe, is also on there for documentary.
Fantastic.
Feature.
So well deserved. I would not be surprised if the First Wave is going to be landing a nomination.
Yeah, you guys are going to have to fight about it.
We don't fight. We just are very supportive of each other.
Just steal each other's like trophies. Just like, oh, where'd it go? I don't know, but I have one at my house. Third question, before you fall completely into darkness.
Oh my goodness! Hang on, I wonder what I can.
Oh no,
do.
it's fine. I'll brighten it up in post. It's fine.
Okay, that's why you shoot on the 500.
Yeah, well, and I've got lights, and it is also 2 o'clock.
Here, hang on.
Hit us with the cell phone.
Yeah. Well, if it would be working.
Oh, goodness. Hey, that kind of works. But pretty dramatic. The third question, the documentarian question, recommended footwear.
Recommended footwear. So when I am in the mountains of Mexico or Peru or Nigeria, then I wear hiking boots. Gosh, what is the brand? Hang on.
Okay. Yep. Here for it.
So these are my hiking boots.
Okay. Yeah. Those look kind of stylish too.
Yeah, and now where's my? I'm just going to, because I've had them for eons. I don't even know what brand
the label's been
are.
burnt off. Yeah.
There are DRY dry. It just says dry, but this is not it. Nope, sorry. It is Zopa. I can't.
Well, someone's going to have to go on the YouTube and just look at them and be like, those ones.
Anyhow, there are my favorite hiking boots. They have a really good fit for the heel. They have a good traction. And so I find incredibly supported through these shoes. And that's, what you want. You really want a shoe that doesn't slip and really kind of cusps your heel. Important to me. Or I need high arch support, so I wear Nikes.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. Well,
there you go.
Works for me.
I never used to ask that. And then after like the fifth documentarian brought up footwear, I was like, I should just start asking all the documentarians, because everyone has a different answer. And it's kind of funny. And I've got them all in an Amazon list.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah. Just like a wish list, or it's not like my wish list, but it's just a list of every shoe that any documentarian has ever said.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll make a book about it or something. But anyway, thank you so much for spending the time with me. That was a fantastic conversation. I'd love to have you back.
I enjoyed it so much. Thank you for inviting me, Kenny. I loved it.
Yeah.
And have the challenge of, what often in true documentary style happens when you conduct an interview or a scene when the light goes down, right?
Yeah. There's going to be a lot of resolve work done in the last 20 minutes of this.
But anyway, I enjoyed it tremendously. So thank you so much.
I'm great. Very glad to hear that. We'll have you back when your next project is wrapped and ready to go.
Fantastic. I would be delighted.
Okay. Well, thanks again, and take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Frame and Reference is an Owlbot production. It's produced and edited by me, Kenny McMillan, and distributed by Pro Video Coalition. Our theme song is written and performed by Mark Pelly, and the F&R Mattbox logo was designed by Nate Truax of Truax Branding Company. You can read or watch the podcast you've just heard by going to provideocoalition.com or youtube.com/owlbot, respectively. And as always, thanks for listening.